if you're constantly looking to take all the credit and show that you're the best guy and you're the smartest guy, then you are the lid on your organization. So one of the things that I always encourage my students and my residents to do is read. And it's one of the best leadership books that I've ever read is the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell. And the very first chapter he calls it the law of the lid, that it says that you are the lid on your organization. So your organization, your company, your team can't grow more than you do. And so if you've got someone who's just out for themselves and they're looking to make themselves the best, that is going to be an extremely limited team in terms of effectiveness and growth.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me today on Prescription for Success. I'm really delighted to have you, and I want to begin by reminding you that Prescription for Success is a production of MD Coaches, a company dedicated to putting healthcare professionals back in charge of healthcare delivery by coaching, mentoring, and supporting physicians at all stages of their career. You can find out more at mymdcoaches.com. My interview guest today is not only a very busy gastroenterologist, he also hosts a very successful podcast of his own called The Scope of Practice. You can also follow him on his website, thescopeofpractice.com, where he offers physicians lots of very important information and advice about all the things they didn't teach us in medical school. So now let's hear my interview with Dr. Brent Lacey. Well, hello there. I am just absolutely delighted today to be talking with Dr. Brent Lacey, who is a gastroenterologist from, my goodness, Brent, you're going to have to help me. Is it Coppell or Coppell, or what city in Texas is it where you're making your home?
Yeah, it's Coppell. The way I help people remember that is good cops go to cop heaven and bad cops go to Coppell.
That's great. Well, in any case, I hope your life in Coppell is good, and we really are excited to have you on the show. You got a great story to tell, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with our audience.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. I'm very excited to be here for you guys.
Well, what we always do is kind of begin at the beginning, and I'd like to get a sense for when you got the idea that it might be your calling to go to medical school. Did you have medical influencers in the family, or did it hit you sometime later in life? Where did the idea come from?
Yeah, so my father is a physician, and he and I have been very close since I was young. I mean, we've really been best friends since I was about 9, and he is just the most wonderful, amazing person, and has been basically the king of whatever room he walked into ever since I was a kid. I mean, he was an assistant scoutmaster in our Boy Scout troop. He was a deacon at church. He was leader in his medical office. He was chief of staff at the hospital. So it was an incessant thing when I was growing up that people would ask me if I was going to be a doctor like my dad. And once I got into high school, it started to bother me a little bit that just feeling like, okay, people think I can't be my own man, that I'm not going to make my own decisions, that I've got this
the adolescent thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, being a dumb teenager. And Mom and Dad were always very good, actually, about not pushing me one way or the other. I remember Dad talking to me about it directly one time, and he said, listen, if you want to be a physician, he said, I think you've got the makings of an amazing one. I think your personality would fit it very well. I think you'd be outstanding. And if you do it because of some sort of misguided obligation, feeling like you need to follow in my footsteps or something, you will be miserable and you will hate your life and you will hurt your patients. So you need to
Wow.
not do it because of that. He said, now, if you
That's really
wanted,
great advice.
it really was. And so he said, if you want to be a physician, you need to do it because it's what you want to do. And so by the time that I finished high school, I had definitively ruled out medicine as a career. And the only other career I definitely ruled out was law, because I figured Dad would probably disown me if I became a lawyer.
Understandable.
And so I actually went to college as a business major.
So when you started at Texas A&M, the medicine thing had kind of been taken off the table for all intents and purposes at that point.
It was 100%. It was one of only two things I had definitely ruled out with 100% certainty.
Well, this is a great story. I want to know where the turnaround happened.
Well, so it happened about 9 months into, or 8 or 9 months into my college career. So I went in as a business major with plans to go into marketing. So I'd done some broadcast journalism stuff when I was in high school, and I'd been a writer since I was a little kid. I loved writing. And I thought that would be a really natural fit, doing, some marketing, advertising, things like that. And then my spring break of my freshman year in college, I went on a medical missions trip to Juarez, Mexico. At the time, my father was still very connected closely to the medical school in Dallas. He was in private practice at that point, but he had been very closely connected to the medical school. He used to be a professor there.
And was he a gastroenterologist also? I hate to interrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He is. Yeah, he's a gastroenterologist. So he had been a professor at the med school there for years and years and was very active with the Christian Medical Association. And every spring break, they would go on a week-long mission trip to one of the border towns in Mexico with a basic concept of going to minister to people's physical needs. And then they would go with seminary students from SMU or from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, ministering to spiritual needs at the same time. So we basically set up free clinics in churches. And I'd been on these mission trips since I was a kid. And so I'd been to a bunch of them. And so, Dad calls me up and says, hey, listen, we need Spanish translators, and I would love to get you out to come with us if your spring break lines up. And I thought it would be fun to go as a translator and just get, test out my Spanish skills, which I thought would be a lot of fun. And so I went on this trip absolutely with the plan of just going to spread my wings as far as, translation goes. And that week, I really felt like God was calling me to medicine. It was an incredibly powerful time for me, and just feeling this call on my life. And
what do you think got your attention?
So it was our third day or our fourth day there, and a lady had come to see us. She had walked something like 3 or 4 miles to come see us because she had heard that we were going to be coming. She had horrible rheumatoid arthritis, just horrific. I mean, very gnarled, deformed fingers, and it just was in pain all the time. And something like that, you need biologic agents, you need surgery. I mean, we were not equipped to handle that kind of thing.
Sure.
So we gave her some ibuprofen and some acetaminophen tablets just for comfort, just to try to give her something. And I mean, she just cried. She was so appreciative and so grateful for what paltry gift we were able to give her. And she asked if she could pray with our group. And so I translated the prayer for the team, and my heart just broke hearing how grateful she was. And I really felt God tugging on my heart and saying, listen, this is where I want you. Kind of felt like Jonah a little bit. I've been running from that calling for a long time. And all of a sudden it's like, all right, I'm gonna smack you around and tell you where you need to go. It's like, all right, I can take a hint. Fair enough. So a couple weeks later, I changed my major to pre-med, and then crammed the whole pre-med curriculum from 4 years into 3 years, which is not a strategy I advise for folks.
Yeah, that must have been stressful. But yeah, you graduated with honors. You must have done all right with it.
Yeah. I did pretty well. I had some pretty rough semesters, 17, 18 hours of like microbiology and organic chemistry and biochemistry. And so I had a few rough semesters, but once you have a call on your life that's that strong, there's no question of if. It's just a question of how and what's it going to take. I mean, failure was just not an option at that point. So sure. I just knew that this is where I needed to go.
With the scholastic performance that you had, I can imagine that you could probably have had your pick of medical schools, but you picked San Antonio. What was the story behind that?
Well, I applied to a lot of different places, both in state and out of state. And the thing for me is that I really wanted to go to a place with outstanding clinical training. And for me, I knew that it just wasn't important to go to the most quote unquote prestigious school. Now, if your listeners are out there and you went to Harvard or Yale or Dartmouth or Johns Hopkins or whatever, hey, more power to you. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But here's the thing, the anatomy that I learned at San Antonio and the anatomy that they learned at, say Vanderbilt, it's the same.
Pretty much the same.
I mean,
right?
it hasn't really changed that much in the last 100 years. And so I wanted to go to a place with really exceptional clinical training that produced good physicians who were good people. And when I went and I interviewed probably, 15 places or something. And when I went to both San Antonio and Houston, one of the things that really impressed me about both places was just that the people that were there were just good people, the kind of person that you would want as your physician, or the kind of person that you would want to be on your team if you're on a medical rotation in the hospital. And I think that was really the key factor for me, because for me, I figured every medical school is going to have opportunities for learning as long as I know how to seek them out, and I can figure that out. But I want to go to a place where there's good people and where they're going to challenge me. And I found that in San Antonio.
And when you got there, did you feel from the outset that you were in exactly the right place? Were there some challenges along the way that made you think you might have made a mistake, or what was the story at that point?
Yeah. So my second day of medical school is when I determined I probably couldn't hack it.
That far into it. Huh?
Yeah, it was, oh, Randy, it was so painful. I'll never forget. I was sitting in my apartment on the second day of med school. It was a Tuesday, and it was like 5:30 in the afternoon. And I spent legitimately a half hour with my embryology textbook. It took me a half hour to read 2 paragraphs because I kept having to look up every single word. I'm like, I don't know what this word means. And then trying to construct a sentence was painful. It's like reading Greek. I'm just looking at this going, oh my gosh, this is so painful. And I fell asleep reading the book, and I woke up 2 hours later in a haze. It took me a half hour to read a paragraph. That is not a sustainable model. I guess I'm not going to make it. I talked to some friends the next day, and I told them my story, and they said, oh yeah, dude, we didn't even bother with embryology yet. We're just drowning over here. Everyone was in the same boat.
Isn't it funny how that happens? I think everybody wakes up on day 2 and thinks, my Lord, I'm drowning. And then when you walk around and talk to your classmates, they got the same look on their face, right?
Well, and I think it was helpful to go through that because that happened to me more than once. I mean, I remember it happening my first day of internship too. I was on call in the intensive care unit, and I don't know who I angered during my residency interview to get put on call in the ICU on day 1 of internship. I remember that evening thinking, oh my goodness gracious, people are so sick here. I thought I was prepared, and man, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. But having had that experience, that second day of med school, and going, no, wait, I've been here before. Take a breath, get back in there. You can do this. And you just kind of have to force yourself to keep going.
And there again, on continuing the stories, I got to think you could have landed postgraduate training anywhere, and you decided to get yours in the Navy. How did that come about?
That was another faith journey for me. So after I finished college, I went to Yellowstone National Park by myself for a week with an intent to go up and just be still and just pray and listen, and really felt that week that God was calling me to military service, which frankly I was surprised about because both of my grandfathers were in the military. One was a Marine, one was in the Navy, and they both fought in World War II. But fast forward 70 years and nobody else in my family on either side has been in the military except for me. So it's not something I ever grew up with, or, I always had great respect for the military, being in the Boy Scouts and being active and all that, but never really had any inclination towards military service, but really felt that week that God was calling me there. And so I joined the Navy actually during medical school. So right there at the beginning of my first year, I applied for and got a Navy scholarship. So I actually went to medical school on Navy scholarship and then went
I see.
and did my postgraduate training in the Navy afterwards.
What kind of things did the Navy teach you that you don't think you would have learned in a non-military school?
It's tough to say a little bit. The training environment was actually quite similar in terms of what you do, in terms of the medicine, because they're all ACGME accredited programs.
Sure.
And so you have to meet certain criteria. And so the residency programs were structured very similarly to civilian medical programs. But I think one of the biggest things for me that I got out of the military, and I think there's a lot of this to be gained in a lot of civilian residencies as well, but I don't have as much direct experience with that, is the team mentality, the camaraderie, the esprit de corps. There's a natural inclination towards a mission focus in the military rather than an individual focus. And so there is a big emphasis on team. What's the team doing? How is the team winning? How is the team going to achieve this goal or meet this metric? And I think we were really naturally inclined towards that from the very beginning because we're all in the military, and they really train that into you. And so I think that was probably a greater focus than I would have gotten at a civilian facility. But as far as the medicine goes, I think it was about the same. It's a pretty similar experience.
It's an interesting observation, and I can see some significant truth in what you're talking about. I know in some of the residency programs in the academic institutions or so-called academic institutions, I think you see more competitiveness and trying to outshine the other guy because after all, there are only whatever number of chief residencies there are and that kind of thing. But it sounds like what you're telling me is that you didn't really feel that in the Navy. Is that right?
I didn't feel it as much, but I will say that I also tend to have a blind spot towards that kind of thing. My attitude generally is towards building other people up and focusing on the team. And so I tend to not recognize it when people are all out for themselves. Or I'll say it this way, I'm probably one of the last ones to know about it. And it's usually because someone else is complaining about it. And then it'll suddenly dawn on me, yeah, I guess they really never do help out with stuff. But I tend to focus on doing my job and focus on making sure I'm doing the right thing and helping other people. And so I don't tend to notice that kind of thing. So in fairness, I probably have a blind spot for that.
Well, it sounds like you got to be the perfect attitude for dealing with exactly that phenomenon, or not aware of it.
Well, and I think it's the right attitude for medicine generally. If you're constantly looking to take all the credit and show that you're the best guy and you're the smartest guy, then you are the lid on your organization. So one of the things that I always encourage my students and my residents to do is read. And it's one of the best leadership books that I've ever read is the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell. And the very first chapter he calls it the law of the lid, that it says that you are the lid on your organization. So your organization, your company, your team can't grow more than you do. And so if you've got someone who's just out for themselves and they're looking to make themselves the best, that is going to be an extremely limited team in terms of effectiveness and growth. But if you've got someone who's out to multiply the success of others, then that team's capacity for growth and achievement is limitless.
Remember medical school? You were confident, studious, hardworking, and you learned what to expect in all manner of patient care. Then reality struck. Regulations, expenses, staff management, and administration. Is this what we signed up for? Stress on the verge of burnout, no time for family, or the reason we got into medicine. Helping people. What are the options when you're afraid you're in the wrong career? Transition, teach, quit? What if there was another way? MD Coaches can help. We're a team of medical professionals with a century of experience in the clinical and business sides of medicine. More importantly, MD Coaches has been where you are, stressed and trying to navigate a world school didn't prepare us for. MD Coaches is your mentor, your confidant, to help you make your practice shine, navigate administrations, and successfully lead staff and projects. Or if you're ready to transition, we can help there too. MD Coaches is doctors, helping doctors. Visit our website to receive a free, no-obligation consultation. Go to mymdcoaches.com/RX. That's mymdcoaches.com/RX. Isn't it time someone else was on your side? Don't let the business of being a doctor stop you from doing what you love. That site again, mymdcoaches.com/RX. Visit us today.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians for physicians to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests, whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics. Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. When it came time to think about subspecialization, was GI always on your radar scope, or was that something that came along later?
No, I think I was still kind of fighting the 16-year-old version of myself and saying, all right, well, all right, fine. I'm going to be a doctor, but I'm not going to go into internal medicine. So I'll do something else. And then my third year in medical school, when I did my internal medicine rotation, and I got to morning report for the first time, instantly I felt at home and I said, these are my people. So I was like, well, dang it. Okay, fine. All right, fine. I'll be an internal medicine physician, but I'm not going to do GI. All right. That's where I draw the line. And
no kidding.
Yeah. I was just fighting it the whole way. But going into my second year of residency, my top 3 specialties that I was considering general internal medicine, but my top 3 specialties otherwise I was thinking about were hemonc, infectious disease, and GI. And I did my hemonc rotation in the fall and really just did not find oncology to be very engaging for me. It was too cut and dry for me. It was, this many cycles of this chemotherapy regimen and this many cycles of radiation. And I didn't get stimulated by it personally. So I thought, okay, well, that one's not going to work out. And then infectious disease, I came within a hair's breadth of choosing ID. Actually, I loved infectious disease. I really, really enjoyed it. And especially in the Navy, all of the opportunities to go out. I mean, the Navy infectious disease docs have major stations in tropical medicine. So they have a station in Peru, they have a station in Ghana,
wow.
They have a station in Cairo, and they get to do some really amazing things with tropical medicine. And so
I bet they do.
I came really close to doing that, but I really have always liked working with my hands, so I do woodworking as a hobby and so that kind of thing. So I've always enjoyed that. And I wanted to have that be part of my practice. And so you don't really get that so much with infectious disease. And so then when I went to do my GI rotation, instantly I felt at home. I said, I love all these people. Everyone is so happy here. Everyone is just friendly. The medicine is absolutely fascinating. There's a huge variety. And still, even today, I've been in practice for years now, and not a week goes by that I don't look at some situation and go, that's different. What am I going to do here? And it keeps it interesting. So that's how I ended up in GI. It was kicking and screaming the whole way.
Well, it sounds like you're deliriously happy with your choice and went ahead and got yourself established in practice near where you grew up, right?
Yeah. Well, so I got out of the military after serving 11 years active duty and came home to Dallas. And so, so I grew up in this area and so my practice is in North Dallas. And as a matter of fact, in practice with my father. So, I mean,
How about that?
it all comes full circle. Yeah. So about
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago, the CEO of the GI Alliance, which is the biggest GI group in the country now, I was just up at the office visiting, and he came strolling through and said, "Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I haven't seen you in a while. Hey, you're still active duty. So what are you doing when you get out of the Navy?" I said, "Well, I don't know. Look for a job somewhere." He said, "You want to work for me?" I was like, "Yes." Yes, I do. So then when I got out last summer, joined the core group of the GI Alliance here in Dallas, and so that's where I am now, and I love it. It's just an amazing team, and
That's great.
and as an added bonus, getting to work with my father every day. It's I mean, it's
Yeah.
I don't know
That's
how
got
you
to be
beat
a
that. It's
blast.
just it's a fabulous time. It really is.
Got to be a blast. So here you are early in your private practice, and I would think, at least in a manner of speaking, are still learning a lot of things because let's face it, private practice is not residency practice. But rather than being completely consumed by that, you've involved yourself in a project to help your fellow physicians survive. So tell us about this thing that you've invented called scope of practice, which I love the name, by the way, from a gastroenterologist, the scope. Yeah, man.
Yeah, I was gonna say I love a good dad joke. So yeah, so about 7 years ago or so, I had gotten involved teaching Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University at my church, and I really enjoyed that a lot. And then started getting asked to do some presentations at the hospital where I was working at the time. So the OR nurses asked me to talk to them about how to set up a retirement plan. And then the residents were asking, well, how do we plan for getting rid of student loans, that kind of thing. And so I started getting asked to do some talks and started recognizing, okay, I'm getting the same 7 or 8 questions all the time here. It would be really great if I had a blog or something where I could just write an article and just reference it for folks. Like, oh yeah, I wrote a whole thing about this. I should really have a blog or something. And then I thought to myself, hey, I should really have a blog or something. So, I was like, I wonder what it takes to do that. So I just started looking up and some different resources and learned how to do a website and created a website, and it was terrible. And so I ended up hiring someone to create one for me, but wrote all the content myself. And I said, well, let me just try this out for a bit, see how it goes. And like I said earlier in the conversation here, I've been a writer since I was young, and I really enjoy it. So I wrote, like, I don't know, 25, 30 articles and put them all up on the blog all at once. And mostly it was just as an exercise to prove to myself that I could do it, because I figured if I get burned out doing this after 20 articles, then it's not going to be sustainable. But it was going strong at 30, and I was like, okay, I guess this is something I can do. So
To the point where you actually offer to write for other people that need to come up with a blog, right?
yeah, and so that was one of the ways that I started expanding. Was to write some stuff for other people and just start to learn more about the space. What are people asking about? I figured from my work with the finance folks that there has to be more people out there, and everybody's got to have all the same questions. I mean, there's too much consistency for that to not be the case. And so I started looking for some different outlets to write for, and different bloggers, and started getting asked to speak at some conferences and things. And then I started looking into it a little bit more. And so, because like I said, my original passion had been for personal finance, but then I started looking around and going, there's actually a deeper issue, because there's a lot of people that are writing in the personal finance space for physicians. And I really needed something to differentiate. And I was like, why are people going to read my stuff if there's already 3 or 4 other really big ones for personal finance? And so the other thing that I had really observed over the years is that physicians that were coming out of training were really not equipped to run a clinical practice. How to manage a team, how to hire and fire, how to create culture, how to cast vision, how to think strategically. These are just not things that are taught in med school anywhere that I'm aware of. And I felt like that was something that needed to be taught. I had the benefit of having some really great experiences in college where I got to learn a lot of that stuff. And I just felt like that was something that was missing from medical training and needed to be fixed. And so that's where I really came up with the idea of the scope of practice, to really help people learn to manage their businesses more successfully, grow their leadership skills, and master their personal finances. So it's all the stuff we should have been learning in medical school that we were never taught.
Well, Brent, one of the things that impressed me the most about your blog and the website, and particularly the podcast, the space is kind of filled with people that want to give you advice on how to manage your business finances, how to manage your personal finances, how to grow your practice, how to do these little things, these little siloed things that we all have to deal with. But man, you're taking it all over the place. You got advice on just about everything that a physician comes in contact with that can be a potential struggle. You're getting guests on your podcast to talk about those types of things. You really have a really impressive array of different topics. Did you think from the beginning that this was wise to try to cover that much territory? Were there people telling you, no, 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 you need to focus? How did it grow at that point?
It was kind of organic. Like I said earlier, I was in Boy Scouts since I was little. I was an Eagle Scout. I did a lot of leadership work when I was in college. So leadership as a general concept has been something I've been very passionate about for a long time. And the challenge for me, I think, that there are just so many facets to leadership that there's not a good way to niche down to the point that you can focus on a singular topic. As if your goal is to create really excellent leadership qualities in people, you have to hit a lot of different things. That's the thing that's made it really fun, is that it lets me explore a lot of different topics. So you need to talk about communication. You need to talk about strategic vision casting. You need to talk about how to hire and fire properly. You need to talk about how to create a dynamic, thriving team culture. You need to talk about legal, business. There's all kinds of stuff that you need to focus on. And this is an opportunity for people to grow over time. So one of the things that I've observed in my leadership journey is that at any given point in my life, I mean, if you take a snapshot of any point in time, there will be some specific thing that I'm learning more about or focusing more on or trying to grow in a particular area, but it's not the same thing all the time. So, at one point I may be learning about how to communicate more effectively with someone from a certain culture. But then in the next breath, I'm learning more about how to navigate the legal issues associated with HIPAA or with the zoning codes for how to build a building or something like that. So there's all these different things that you're constantly learning and constantly growing with. And so that gives me a lot of freedom to really tackle a lot of topics. And so what I wanted the scope of practice to eventually grow into is the place where you can go to get the answer to any question related to medical business, leadership, and personal finance for physicians.
I think that's really wise, and I really am impressed with how skillfully you did that. When you get into these areas of discussion where there are lots of chapters to the book, I think you can mess it up by trying to get too far into the details. But you seem to be keeping it at an accessible level. Every physician doesn't necessarily have to have the skills of a CPA in order to make sure that his personal bookkeeping is straight, but you do want to have some knowledge, and you seem to have a way of getting just exactly at that point that you need in order to be conversant with a particular skill without going so deep that you get lost and forget about everything else. Have I got the right idea? Am I missing it altogether?
No, I think that's right. And for me, I've approached it the same way that I approached being a medical school professor when I used to be one. And that is that you need to get the right ideas across. You need to get the right values across, and you need to give people practical, actionable things that they can do to achieve some of those goals. And I think the mistake that people make a lot is the concept is called the curse of knowledge. So let's say, for example, for gastroenterology, I understand gastroenterology at a level of 10 out of 10, let's say. At least I hope so. If I purport to do this for a living, I should. But let's say I understand GI at a 10 out of 10. And I'm speaking with my patients. My patients are going to understand GI concepts at a level of 1 or maybe 2. And our tendency as experts in our field, and this is true for any industry, not just medical industry, but your tendency as an expert is to bring your explanation down to a level of like a 7. And your person that you're explaining it to may understand it at a level of 1. So if I take my car to a mechanic and I say, my car is broken, they say, well, what's wrong with it? I said, I don't know. It's broken. Here's the noise it makes. Right. And so the mechanic understands it at a level of 10, and I understand at a level of 2. If they try to explain it using a level of 7, I'm not going to get it. And so they've got to really bring it down and give me something very specific and simple and actionable to really understand what to do. And so that's what I've tried to do. And one of the things that I think has been really helpful for me is that I've been really seeking out what I consider to be experts in non-medical fields to come and teach us this stuff. Because I think that one of the things that's really, I think, valuable as someone who's learning is that if you can get expertise from someone who isn't in your industry specifically, you may learn things that you never knew you needed to learn. So for example, you mentioned you don't need to be a CPA to understand basic personal finance. But if I'm going to have someone come talk about, say, business taxes on the show, I'm going to be interested to have someone who is a CPA, not a physician who has done a lot of tax work. I want someone who's got real expertise, who can really teach us stuff that we need to know. And so I think that's one of the things for me with the podcast and with the blog is that I'm constantly learning these things. So honestly, a lot of the episodes that I have, a lot of the interviews that I have are born out of a question that I have that I want to learn more about. I say, okay, well, I really want to learn more about how to interact with the millennial generation. And so I'll go seek out someone who is an expert on millennials in the workplace. Getting some of honestly, it's kind of like an hour of free consulting for me when I'm doing these podcast interviews, is that I'm learning from people who are experts. And so that's what I hope to be able to give to other people through the Scope of Practice as well.
So Scope of Practice has several components, the website, the podcast, the Facebook page, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. You want to talk a little bit about how those component parts fit together and how people can take advantage of them?
Well, the primary driver is the podcast nowadays. I really enjoy the podcast, and I imagine that your listeners who are listening to this podcast are of a similar vein. The reason I like the podcast for things like this is you can have these long form conversations with people where you can really pick apart different ideas. You can get a broad survey of concepts, but then really dive into the weeds on a particular nuanced area of it. And I really enjoy being able to have those really deep, detailed conversations with folks. So I think the podcast is really the primary driver. One of the things that I think people hopefully will be able to get out of that is that these concepts of how to lead a team, how to manage a project, how to mentor younger generations, how to get the best out of talented people. Those are not concepts that are unique to any stage of your training or any region of the country or any gender or race. Those are universal ideas that everybody needs to know. And while my audience does tend to skew towards the early side of career physicians, yeah, I mean, there's people at all stages of their career that need to know this stuff. I mean, we are never in a position where it's okay for us to just stop learning and growing as physicians. I really believe that. I think the day that you stop growing, it's the beginning of the end for you. And so I'm constantly in a mode of learning and growing, and I think we all should be.
Well, Brent, you have given me a terrific segue into the final segment of our program, and I'm really looking forward to this. So I'm sure our audience is as well. We all want to hear some really detailed and personal advice from you. So I'm going to close my mic and sit quietly, and Dr. Brent Lacey is going to give us his prescriptions for success.
So I would say that for those of you who are out there that are listening, if you want to be successful, there are a lot of things that you can do. And I would encourage you to listen to lots of opinions. Honestly, if you just download every episode of this podcast and then fast forward to the prescriptions for success and you do all those things that everybody talks about, you're going to be wildly successful. And just the fact that you're listening to this and caring about growing and improving is half the battle right there. But there's 3 specific things that I would say would be really valuable for people who want to succeed. And this is true in medicine or in business or with your family life or with your outreach in your community. Three things that I would advise for folks. Number one is you need to read a lot. And I am a big fan of the idea that if you're going to be a leader, you got to be a reader. If you're purporting to be a leader in your field, a leader in your family, a leader in your church or in your community, you need to be constantly learning from people who are better than you, who are smarter than you, who are more experienced than you, or who have been around the block more times than you. Because the more that you can learn from other people, the more you are going to be able to grow. So listen to podcasts like Prescription for Success, listen to podcasts like The Scope of Practice, read books, go to lectures, attend conferences, read, get on blogs, but learn, read. You can never read too much. So that's the first thing I would say is if you want to be a leader, you got to be a reader. The second thing I would say is that you need to grow. And one of my favorite leadership maxims that I've ever heard is that healthy things grow and growing things change. And that is really the change. That is really the key underlying facet to anyone who wants to do more, to do better, to be better, is that you need to grow. And if you're going to grow, you need to change. I think Winston Churchill said it best. He said, to improve is to change, and to perfect is to change often. And I really think that that's true. And I've changed a lot over the course of my medical career and even over the course of the last few years with the Scope of Practice. Just, I'm constantly learning, constantly trying to adapt, and constantly finding that there are things that I need to do differently or that I could do differently or that I could do better. But if you're constantly saying to yourself, how can I do this 5% better? How could I do this 5% more efficiently? How could I make an impact on 5% more people? How could I be 5% nicer to my team today? That 5% is all the difference. I mean, if you look at the DNA of humans and chimpanzees, there's about 3% of the DNA is different. And that 3% is all the difference between us and the chimpanzees. So that 3%, that 5% that you can grow, or that you can change on a regular basis, is going to be the difference maker in your success. And then number three, I would say, is that success is built on a pile of failures. The people that you see that are successful, the people that you see that are winning in whatever area of their life it is, whether it's their marriage or their family or their business, what you're seeing is the success that is constructed after years and thousands of dollars worth of mistakes. And the thing that separates the people who win from the people who don't is the people who win just never gave up. They just never quit. And it's really interesting. I have seen a number of interviews with various business people and various leaders in the community that have shown me that when you're thinking about quitting, a lot of times that's right before you hit the inflection point where things are going to take off and grow. So I remember when I started the podcast last year, it was right in the middle of COVID, right? So that's just the perfect time to start a brand new venture. And the downloads, the numbers were pretty flat for about 6 months. And I really thought about quitting and giving up. And about 3 weeks later, all of a sudden, watching the curve of the audience just turn into a hockey stick and started to shoot up. And it was legitimately within a few weeks of when I had thought about just hanging it up and just giving up altogether. And so I would say that the third thing to remember is that success is built on a pile of failures. And as long as you just keep climbing over it, you keep stepping up, the more failures you have piled up, the higher you're going to be. Don't ever quit. So number one is read. If you want to be a leader, you got to be a reader. Number two is to remember that healthy things grow and growing things change. Number three, remember that success is nothing but standing on top of a pile of your failures.
Well, there is a great deal of wisdom packed into that, Brent, and I really appreciate you being here to share with us today. Before we get out, I want to give you one last opportunity to tell our audience where they can find you, whether it be websites, email addresses, Twitter handles, or whatever. Please let us know right here.
Well, the best way to find me is on the website, which is thescopeofpractice.com. And I actually put together a free resource for your listeners, for anybody who's interested in learning more. It's called 5 Critical Tools for Physician Leaders. And so If you want to be a reader, I've got a reading list that are 35 books that you definitely need to read to grow. And I've got a personal mission statement, creation guide, and 3 other great tools that going to be great resources for anybody who wants to grow. So if you want to download that, it's free. It's thescopeofpractice.com/physician leader tools. So, and that, like I said, that's a free guide for your listeners. It's thescopeofpractice.com/physician leader tools.
Well, once again, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. I know you have a busy schedule, and it was very generous of you to be with us today. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for coming.
Well, thanks for the invitation, Randy. I really had a lot of fun. Thanks a lot.
And that will wrap up this episode of Prescription for Success. We want to send special thanks to Ryan Jones, who created and performed our theme music. Also, no matter where you follow our podcast, we hope you'll become a subscriber. It helps us a lot if you leave us a 5-star rating, and your suggestions always help us get better. We'd also like to hear about your personal prescriptions for success, so please visit our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com and record your advice on SpeakPipe. We might just read your contribution on an upcoming show. Thanks so much for listening today, and remember to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.